Hi there, I'm Logan Medish, and this is High Caliber History. Question for you. When is a Smith Wesson Hand Ejector revolver not a Smith Wesson Hand Ejector revolver? The answer lies in this gun right here. This is a Chinese Warlord copy of a Smith Wesson Hand Ejector 38 Special revolver. They tried very hard to make it look and function like the gun that they were copying. And in most ways, they succeeded quite well. The concept of a Chinese Warlord revolver is kind of unique, let's say. There are far more Chinese Warlord semi-automatic pistol copies, as I'm sure you're well aware from the Kickstarter campaign that Headstamp Publishing is running for Ian McCollum's new book. And the book focuses heavily on the semi-automatic pistols, and only because the funding was able to meet one of the stretch goals that they are putting in a section on Chinese Warlord revolvers. And the reason that it's only a small section, Ian explained, was because there are nowhere near as many of the revolvers that were made as there were of the pistols, and the pistols are more collectible than the revolvers. So when I had the opportunity to pick up this revolver, I thought it was something very, very cool to add to the collection, especially because I am a Smith & Wesson hand ejector, military and police Model 10, whatever you want to call them, collector. And this was just too cool of an opportunity to pass up. So a lot of interesting things going on with this gun. We'll go up closer now and take a look and walk you through all of the differences. So in typical Chinese Warlord revolver fashion, the gun is full of a bunch of nonsense markings that don't translate into anything. So for starters, we've got here on the right side of the frame, if we read it right side up, it's Hsemo, HSS backwards EMO. Although if we read it upside down, which would make the E face the right way, it becomes an Owessa. It doesn't really matter. You take your pick either way. If you want to go with Hsemo or Owessa, it doesn't mean anything. There is a marking on the right side of the barrel here. Normally we would have a caliber marking. If this was an actual Smith & Wesson, of course, this is where it would say 38 S&W special cartridge. But there are just some nonsense characters that obviously don't mean anything at all. And then we flip the gun around, come over to this side, and on the barrel here on a Smith & Wesson, the gun would say Smith & Wesson, but instead what the gun says here is Massond, M-A-S-O-H-N-D, and the D, very interestingly, has been turned so that it's facing down, because yeah, why not, right? And then of course we've got the trademark markings that you find on a Smith & Wesson gun, and it's interesting, they've got the design basically right, in that it's the S&W letters inside of a circle and then the words trademark above and below. They've got an S and a W here, and they've got the circle, but the trademark doesn't quite pan out. Instead, what we end up with is T-A-E-E for trade and M-A-I-K for mark. So in true nonsense fashion, there you go. And then on the top of the barrel, where we would normally have all of your patent and trademark information, instead it is a whole slew of nonsense characters that you couldn't even begin to fake a word out of them. It just doesn't mean anything, doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There are even Chinese characters on the rear face of the cylinder. I have no idea if those characters are right side up at the moment or upside down, but if anyone can read Chinese, let me know. So let's take a look at the internals of this gun. It's crude, no doubt about it there, but it's actually still surprisingly well made. All of the intricate workings and inner workings that you see in a regular Smith Wesson hand ejector of this vintage are present. You know, they're not highly polished like you'll see on some of the parts on the Smith & Wessons and, you know, the genuine guns, but it's all still here. They do not appear to have taken any shortcuts in creating the internal parts that are necessary for this gun. I mean, yeah, in some regards, they can't take shortcuts, right? I mean, it's, if you want the revolver to work, which is a complicated mechanism in and of itself anyway, you've got to have all of the right parts there, and they do. They're all here. They all work. They all function as they should, and it looks very similar to an actual Smith & Wesson hand ejector of that same vintage. You know, all the parts are here. It's basically the same gun, just with a lack of polishing. You know, you can see here on the Smith & Wesson that there's a good polish job on a number of these pieces that is obviously lacking in the Chinese copy, but it's basically the same gun. Really and truly, it's the same gun. You know, here's the two of them together, the Smith & Wesson on the top and the Chinese Warlord copy on the bottom, and they're pretty much spitting images of one another. They are the same size. They're very similar in weight. Just overall exceptionally similar guns. So this is a pair of grips off of that same Smith & Wesson that we had looked at, and they are, you know, they're factory Smith & Wesson grips, exactly what you would expect from grips of the 1920s. So the grips are fully checkered, and they've got the diamond in the center. They've got a nicely cut outline and border around them as well. Exactly the kind of thing that you would expect on a high quality 1920s era Smith & Wesson with all sorts of hand fitting. And so we'll put those to the side, and we'll grab the ones that came off of the Warlord Revolver. And you can see it's a very, very similar design. Also hand checkered with the diamond in the center of the grip. It's got the border cut around the edges. The border is not quite as wide, not quite as deep, but it's basically the same thing. Very, very reminiscent of factory grips, although they are most decidedly not Smith & Wesson factory grips. The same thing can be said about the side plates for these guns. So this one here, we have set the original right on top of the Chinese Warlord version. So Smith & Wesson, Chinese Warlord, and they are absolutely identical. They have the exact same footprint from one that you would find from one to the other. And when we flip them over, again, you see the exact same design on there. So on a Smith & Wesson of this era, we would call the gun pinned and recessed. And the pinned refers to the fact that the barrel is threaded in and then pinned into the frame, and that on the breech of the cylinder, the faces of the chambers would be recessed. Now, it's interesting that this gun has what we would consider a pinned barrel. Whether or not it's actually pinned, you know, who knows. But the chambers, the rear face of the chambers in the cylinder are not recessed. Like an actual Smith & Wesson revolver of this era, it's got a large knurled ejector knob, and the knob is very finely hand checkered. We can tell because of the unevenness to it. It is hand checkered. And the hammer is also bearing hand checkering as well, because it is not exactly the best done on there. True to the time period that this gun is copied after, if this was a real Smith & Wesson instead of a Chinese Warlord copy, this would be referred to as a 5-screw gun, because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 screws holding the side plate on, and then there is 1 screw down here in the trigger guard. Let me see if I can get you a better angle. There we go. Considered a 5-screw gun, 4 on the side plate, and 1 here on the trigger guard. But of course it's kind of irrelevant, because you wouldn't necessarily call this a 5-screw because it's not a Smith & Wesson. I mean, you could call it that if you wanted. Another really odd feature, I guess we'll call it, with this gun is when you're cocking the hammer, again, you have that really thick, distinct clunk as it comes back. But there's also almost what I would call a half cock. There it goes. This is almost a half cock notch. It won't push forward, which is good. I guess that's good. It's locked up in that regard. But it's halfway in between. It still comes back all the way to here, but you don't get an audible click. Like on a Colt, as you're moving through there, you'll get 4 clicks. This we don't get. You just have that one thump as it goes all the way to the back, and yet it can only go halfway. Just another odd, unusual quirk about this Chinese Warlord Smith & Wesson copy. The cylinder release latch on the gun is styled just like that of a Smith & Wesson. It's the same shape and format, because there's different shapes on Colts versus Smith & Wessons. And a Colt you pull back, and Smith you pull forward, and so this is very much the Smith & Wesson design, because it pushes forward in order for you to open up the gun and access it to put your rounds into the cylinder. It does eject properly. The ejector star works, and so it's a Smith & Wesson in a lot of ways, but it's definitely not a Smith & Wesson. If we look up here on the hammer of the gun, the firing pin has been ground. The firing pin itself is pinned into the hammer, but as I said, it's ground down, so it does not reach the rear of the cylinder. It doesn't protrude through the frame, so you couldn't shoot it if you wanted. Aside from that, the cylinder does not lock up at all. The cylinder stop in the bottom of the frame, the cylinder stop does not protrude above the frame at any point in time when you're cocking the hammer. The hand does work in that it rotates the cylinder, but it doesn't actually lock the cylinder into place. It just spins and spins and spins in a free-for-all. So you would never be able to time this gun properly in any way that you could safely shoot it. So there you have it. Now you know when a Smith & Wesson revolver is not a Smith & Wesson revolver. The answer is when it's a Chinese Warlord copy. I hope you enjoyed this video and taking a look at something that you probably won't see anywhere else, unless of course Ian's got a video that hasn't been released yet on one of these guns, which is entirely possible. And maybe this is pictured in the book. I don't know. But at any rate, for the time being, this is definitely something you will only see right here on High Caliber History. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not, share it with someone that you think might enjoy it. And as always, if you've got questions or comments, put them down below, and I will be happy to read them all and answer them. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of High Caliber History. I'm Logan Medish, and we'll see you on the next episode.